Thank you everyone for joining us today. Welcome to our third and our final webinar in the Footprint Evaluation webinar series, which has been supported by and in partnership with the Global Evaluation Initiative. And for this final one, we've timed it to coincide with Local Week as well. Today, we will be looking at an in-development typology for footprint evaluation. So this is something that we're really keen to share and get some feedback on and hear from you as to what you think and how this can be applied and how it can be improved. But before we begin, I'd like to just take a moment to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of our many lands that we are zooming in from today. Myself, I'm joining from Hobart in Tasmania, Australia, and I pay my respects to the Muwi-Nina people of the Southeast Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. I also would like to acknowledge and pay respect to the traditional custodians of the lands on which each of you are living, learning, and working from today. So before I hand over to our presenters to introduce themselves, I do have just a few notes about today's session. As you would have heard when you joined, the session is being recorded, and we will be sharing a video of the presentation section of the session and a written summary of the discussion. To minimize distraction for that recording, we do request that you keep your microphone on mute unless you are speaking, and we encourage you to use the chat function to ask questions, and we'll try to pick up as many of these as possible in the second half of the session. When we do reach the discussion portion, we do encourage you to join in, and if you'd like to speak, to raise your hand, or you can use the chat function to pop in your questions or comments. And after this webinar today, we also would love to see you on the footprint evaluation community to continue this discussion and give more feedback, ask more questions, make more comments so that we can continue learning from each other beyond this live event. And for those who are watching this video, we really do encourage you to participate asynchronously with us. And I'll give some instructions on how to join at the end of today. So now I'm going to hand it over to Andy Rowe to take us away. Thank you, Andy.
Thank you. And I'm speaking to you from the traditional unceded territory of the Coast Salish Nation. We have a small farm here. This is an atypical winter scene with a couple of our horses. And I'm very glad to be joining you today, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks. My name's Patricia Rogers, and I'm speaking to you from Melbourne in Australia. I'd like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, who are the traditional custodians of the lands and waters where I live and work. And if you would like to join us in putting in where you're from into the chat function, we'd love to hear where you're from as well. Thank you. As Alice said, today we are using the same format we've used in the other webinars. We'll be doing a brief presentation, and during that time, please put your comments into chat. Then we'll have 5-minute breakout groups where you can share some thoughts on that. We'll have a few suggestions, questions you might consider, and then we'll come back together in a plenary discussion. We'll be able to pick up on your comments from earlier and also your questions from the breakout groups. And afterwards, we're very keen to continue the discussion, especially in the footprint discussion group and in other fora. Before we go into this, just briefly, we need to stop and think about why all evaluations need to consider environmental sustainability. Why are we doing this? Why are we and other people concerned about this? And one of the big issues is that the world faces a number of serious environmental crises, and the efforts to address them from environmental projects are being outweighed by the huge impacts from business as usual, from all the other programs and policies that aren't specifically about the environment, aren't taking into account natural systems. So one big part of this work is how do we bring together a summary of what the effects are for natural systems? And that's the work that we're talking about here, a summary that can be used in different ways early on to choose between options. It can be used to guide monitoring systems, and particularly can be used for informing discussions about which direction to go. So I'm going to hand over to Andy, who's going to take you through that.
Thank you. can you click again to get the topology? Today we're going to be talking about what we call a draft topology, and we'll be discussing the word typology in later on in the session. And in our first session, we talked about the need to address sustainability in natural systems in all evaluations. And we talked about the concept of sustainability and nexus, where human and natural systems couple. And then in the next session, next webinar, we talked about how do you get started, and we showed you ways to get started. Today, let's assume you started. What are you going to do? The commissioners are going to say, how are you going to assess sustainability? You yourselves will be asking, how do we assess sustainability? Today's session is to take you down the road and to really show you that we can do this. This is entirely within our reach if we choose to do it. So we developed this topology. I'm going to explain it in detail on the next slide. But basically, it goes historically from what we used to do down to bottom destructive, where we just extract natural resources without any regard to the natural system, to where we are now. We're aware of the problems with that. We're making serious and quite often somewhat successful efforts to mitigate or offset that. But we're still harming the system. And we urgently need to get to where we're not harming the system, because by 2030, we're going to reach thresholds that are irreversible. So we have to stop harming the systems. And what we need to do is move towards situations where we're restoring natural systems while also addressing human needs. So why do you need a topology for this, or what will a topology do? It will help you put yourself in a position and be able to deliver on seeing where this intervention is. What is it doing? Is it harming the system? Is it not harming the system? This is very different than what evaluation usually does. It talks about improving, we're moving in the right direction, things like that. Because of 2030, because of urgency, we need to actually know where we are. And this is in fact the remit of evaluation. Evaluation is to talk about the merit and worth of things, is to contribute to improvement. And with the topology, you can do both of those. Next slide, please. The topology was originally developed for an evaluation of the International Fund for Agricultural Development support to smallholders. And that evaluation completed earlier this year. So it's agricultural development. You think of agricultural development, what we used to do was green revolution, plow and plow and plow and use herbicides, pesticides, throw all kinds of water on without trying to be efficient or conserving water at all in pursuit of more output. And that output was needed, but it basically viewed the natural system as something we could extract from endlessly. That was wrong. We became aware of sustainability issues. We became aware that we need better agricultural practices, things like drip irrigation, things like being mindful of our use of foliants, of pesticides, that we need insects, that pesticides were harming bees, which we needed for pollination, that plowing more and more fields was undermining the ability of the soils to sequester carbon. We were cutting trees to have more fields, and that trees were no longer sequestering carbon and providing space for biodiversity. So where we want to go is where we're not causing harm, no net harm. Now, agriculture is pretty well certain to be causing some degree of harm, but we can offset that harm by restoring other elements of the system as part of the same investment. So we're becoming relatively neutral. We have the possibility of being relatively neutral, no longer dragging us down from the perspective of the 2030 thresholds. And where we need to go is the restoration, where we're restoring the natural systems to restore their capacities and abilities. So in the EFAD evaluation, we found that about 75% of the case studies we undertook were actually harming natural systems. There was about 5 or 6, and in the corrected figure it'll be 6, that are either at not causing any harm or somewhat or mildly restorative. They're doing somewhat positive things, but they're not fully restoring the systems. In that evaluation, we also identified all kinds of projects that were actually actively in the restorative camp. So we know we can do this. The IFAD evaluation provided us with proof of concept that the topology works, that it was useful. It became a major focus of the evaluation, particularly with management and with those who were at project and country level, had significant investments in the projects that we were evaluating. After extended discussions, everyone is relatively comfortable with the topology and thinks that it's useful. Can I go to the next slide, please? Well, that left us with the position, well, what are we going to do with our ambition to have the topology used in all evaluations, even those where natural systems are not stated outcomes, they're not an intended part of the intervention. And what we've developed is a 4-step process, where the first step is identify these places where human systems and natural systems in our interventions couple, where they come together. There they are presenting the possibility of harm or restoration. We have those options. We can go in either direction. Then the next step is, well, let's figure out and let's use our science knowledge, science sources, the people who design the intervention and the key people around the intervention to really assess which of these things going on in nexus interactions of the human and natural system actually pose serious threats. And we've developed some methods. We have some underlying methods for dealing with that. So we've got these effects. We've identified these effects that are potentially serious. We have to interpret these effects. What is really serious? And for this, important voices are the communities, the indigenous people, those who are affected by the intervention. Also important voices are environmental organizations, our private sector organizations, our governments at local levels, at national levels, and the program people themselves. In other words, go to all of these interests and get them to interpret what is going on with those identified threats that we know are the more serious threats. And from that, we get a picture of the effect of the intervention on the natural system, in the most serious high-risk territories. We now have to interpret, so what? What difference does it make? And for this, we need to enter into dialogue. We need structured consultations or more open qualitative ones, things that we're talking about a wide range of interventions and evaluations. So we have a wide range of options how you can approach this. And what we need to do is understand the so what, because that's the important thing. That's what positions us on that typology. And sometimes we'll be in a position where we realize we need to revise our interpretation. We need to go back to step 3 and revise that because consultations with local communities say, well, we're getting all these benefits, or this is what is actually going on. Or they're saying, this is really harming us. This is not good, because we can see in natural systems, we can see in our regular daily lives how some of these are being impaired. And that so what is really the job of evaluation. And that's why we have the topology. So we can say, first of all, the interpretation, where are we on that topology? Are we harming? Not as badly as we might have in the past. We're getting better, But it's no good to say we're getting better when 2030 and all those thresholds is only 8 years away. We have to say, this is where these interventions are now. And we have to say it with evidence, and we have to say it in a way that all of the key interests have been part of this decision, this interpretation, because that's what determines use of the evaluation. So we're doing it in a use-seeking way that will enable the interventions, will facilitate and encourage and perhaps pressure the interventions to improve and improve in real time, because 2030 is not far away. We're at the end game. We need to make significant change. And if evaluation is to do that, it has to be able to interpret and say, so what? And do so in a way that engages use. Can we go on to the next slide, just briefly. So this is what I've just been talking about, how we would do that. And I just want to touch on the examples. And that first step, we might say in agriculture, well, we're concerned about farms and water bodies, because we know that's a nexus position, because farming requires agriculture, requires water. The threat, the water is going to draw from aquifers, and those aquifers are already under threat. Climate changes includes drought and is making arid zones and semi-arid zones worse. It also includes flooding. So where water is drawing from aquifers or water bodies, that can be serious because things are getting worse from climate change, and the farming is making it even more worse. Probably only minor threats from sediments and nutrient flows to water bodies, except where we keep getting repeated cyclones and heavy rainfall, then that leakage from sediments and nutrient flows to water bodies. And nutrients are things like nitrogen. They cause problems in the water. They cause bloom. They interrupt the oxygen cycle so that water is no longer able to support life. And we get dead zones in the water. So coming on to interpretation, would be further depletion of the aquifer without replacement. It's going to impair household water supply. The water that households rely on from their wells is going to become brackish, saline, unfit for consumption, and it's going to harm backyard gardens, and we're not going to have the water we need for agriculture. And we know how to fix it. And in the EFAD evaluation, we had examples of cases, wonderful cases, where the restoration of natural systems while meeting the water needs of smallholders and of households were being met, were being addressed. So this is what the typology works like. This is how we're working towards developing the guidance for you to apply it. Can I go to the next slide, please? Now, how we're going forward is different than how we did it in EFAD. In EFAD, we did it in good evaluation methods. We had some specific resources. We had an evaluation team of about 12 people. We had quite good budgets. It was a high priority evaluation. We were doing 20 very detailed case studies with very significant effort. And the study team were all knowledgeable about agriculture, about the various systems, agricultural systems, and the various landscapes. And they were also very well informed on natural systems. So that we had very strong evidence. We were able to garner very strong evidence that, as some readers of the evaluation tried to push back and then gave up because our evidence was very strong. We also had a very strong case study leader and evaluation team leader. And what we did is, as the leader of this Nexus study, went through all the documentation for each case study. I provided a provisional assessment and the rationale, the citations from all their documentation. That was reviewed by the case study leader, whoever did that case study. Then it was reviewed by others who had, in the study team, evaluation team, who had expertise in this area. And we had a discussion. Sometimes they would go back to the original documentation, do some more interviews, clarify things, and we arrived at the conclusion, which you should have seen in the earlier slide, and you will see in the slide when I get there. In a few cases, we changed my initial assessment, and that was good. We found that there were either mistakes or I was putting the emphasis incorrectly in my assessment, or in one case, there were some errors in the case study. That is not a sustainable way to go forward to small evaluations of $50,000, $80,000 to evaluation $150,000, $200,000, especially when we know from the stock takings done by the Canadian Evaluation Society and done by the UN evaluation group, that evaluation focuses almost exclusively on human systems, and that the capacities of evaluators on natural systems and sustainability and the intellectual infrastructure, the guidance and the publications, etc., are all very weak. So we need to provide the type of guidance and structure that I've outlined for you. Can I go to the next slide? And this is what we're aiming to do with it and produce the guidance. It needs to be replicable. It needs to be producing valid and reliable judgments. And it needs to be something that is pursuing use, that is easy to use. It is aligning itself with what we know about use. And the final slide on this, please. Now we have some questions. We're well into the generic version, which applies to typology and gives the structure, follows the structure I've been applying, but we have some open questions. I talked about an agriculture version. We talked about, do we need specialized versions for different settings like transport, industrial pollution, built environment, etc. We don't know right now. This is downstream, and any insights you have today, we would appreciate. So there's ambiguity about where we're going. We've started to train. We know what it's going to look like. Fine-tuning, we're not so certain about. We'll produce the original guidance, the generic version, and the agricultural version fairly soon, by the end of next month, and we'll see what we need after that. Thank you. Over to you, Patricia.
Right. Thank you, Andy. Thanks for taking us through that. This is a time now where you get a chance in your small groups to chew over what you've heard. You might like to consider some of these questions, like, first of all, would it be useful to use a topology like this in your work? And if so, how do you think you might use it? Or what sort of interventions would you really like to see us and others work on to develop customized topology? And is typology the right word? Does that really ring the bells for you, or would you want to label it as something else? And is there something else that needs some further explanation, or we have some comments or suggestions? So this is 5 minutes in a very small group. You just get a chance to chew over that for a bit. As soon as you come back in, please start putting your comments into the chat so we can pick them up as we talk together.
Speaking of communities of practice, we do really love that there's enthusiasm about this, because we do have the footprint evaluation discussion group, which we would encourage you to jump onto. And for those, I know there are a few questions in the comments, and a lot of people in the sort of webinar who have some extra questions or want to continue the discussion beyond this webinar series. Please do jump on and ask your question, or give some comment, or just share some resources about what we've talked about today, or that you think would be relevant. You can jump onto the link down the bottom, betterevaluation.org/footprint_evaluation, to find links to sign up to that community of practice, the footprint evaluation community. And you can also as well sign up to a newsletter to be alerted when we do release the guidance. That's come out of this phase, and that will come out of future phases of this project as well. So with that, thank you very much for everyone who has attended, and to Andy and Patricia for walking us through where the footprint evaluation initiative currently is with the typology, and setting us up to continue these conversations and to think about how it can be applied in practice in different sectors and regions. We have been thrilled to be able to have these webinar series and have you all attend either one or multiple of these. And we hope that we will see you in the discussion group and continue this conversation going forward. Thank you very much, everyone.
Great. Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.